Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Donald J. Trump has been convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records.
A New York jury finds the former U.S. president guilty on all counts in his hush money trial. Trump remains defiant.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial.
Plus,
so there's a story at the surface of the water, and then there's all of the undercurrents sort of pushing and pulling that still makes some of the outcomes a little bit less obvious.
a new survey shows the ruling New Democrats with a sizable lead months before a provincial election. What's happening in the fight for second place? And
it's a pretty big blow. We have no real funds now left to do any major dike works.
3 BC communities hit by brutal flooding 3 years ago want to know why Ottawa has rejected their requests for rebuilding help.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Historic news out of New York. Donald Trump is now a convicted felon after a jury in that state found the former U.S. president guilty on all charges in his hush money trial. As Chris Reyes reports, the verdict came after more than 5 weeks of evidence and testimony, but less than 2 days of deliberation.
For the first time in American history, a former president has been convicted of criminal charges. After about 10 hours of deliberations over 2 days, a jury of 12 New Yorkers has found Donald Trump guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying business records in connection to hush money payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels and others ahead of the 2016 presidential election. In court, the verdict was read by the jury foreperson, and then one by one, each juror was asked to confirm their verdict. After reading their decision, the jury left the courtroom without looking at Trump. Trump spoke briefly and walked off with his team without taking any questions.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people, and they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here.
Outside the courthouse, reaction as soon as the verdict came out.
We're still going to vote for Trump. We're still voting for Trump. It doesn't change much.
I did not think that this was actually going to happen, and I can't believe it. It's about time he was held accountable for something.
The judge has set Trump's sentencing for July 11, just days before the Republican National Convention, where he will become their party's official presidential nominee. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
To BC politics now, and yet another major poll of the major parties less than 5 months before a fall provincial election. The latest survey by the Angus Reid Institute shows the BC NDP with a double-digit lead and the BC Conservatives in second place. A pattern is also emerging that shows BC United with faltering support. And as Mira Baines explains, one pollster suggests all eyes will be on Surrey.
The battle for the provincial vote has been boiling over, with the leaders of BC United and the BC Conservatives clashing after a failed merger. Angus Reid Institute's latest poll confirms a pattern emerging in terms of voter support, with the BC NDP in the lead. The BC NDP is holding a comfortable lead with 41% support among those polled, while the BC Conservatives follow with 30%. Kevin Falcon's rebranded BC United have 16% support, while the BC Greens have 11%. The pollster points out the numbers also show what's going on under the surface.
What's really key here is that half of the BC United voting base says that it might abandon BC United for the BC Conservatives if it meant stopping the NDP, but also crucially, half of BC Conservative voters say that they might abandon the BC Conservatives for BC United.
Also emerging out of the data is the importance of crucial wins in voter-rich and vast Surrey. 10 ridings are up for grabs.
And if you look at what's happening, it's actually the BC Conservatives who are edging the BC NDP just by a little bit at the moment.
Today, a website emerged attacking both Kevin Falcon of BC United and John Rustad with the BC Conservatives. Rustad's party is under the spotlight this week after a candidate in Courtney Comox dropped out after his social media views opposing pride parades became public.
He recognized it could be a distraction for our campaign, offered his resignation, and we accepted it.
Meanwhile, Falcon responded to another website calling for his resignation.
In 2013, there was a bunch of people that put together some Resign Christie website until she won a majority in the government, and they all disappeared, and so did the website. So, I mean, this is the kind of, political gamesmanship that sometimes goes on.
The Angus Reid poll shows people used favorable words to describe NDP leader David Eby, but also said he was boring, with the words used to describe both Falcon and Rustad largely unfavorable. But Curl said a few bad bounces for the BC NDP during the next 5 months could lead to a very different picture on Election Day in October. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
Politicians, doctors, and researchers gathered in Richmond to look for solutions to BC's toxic drug crisis. Their focus was on recovery, but it came with controversy. As Michelle Gassoub explains, other advocates for drug users say they were barred from attending.
At this hotel in Richmond, doctors, advocates, and policymakers gathered, discussing solutions to the toxic drug crisis.
So we will bring an end to this idea of safe supply and decriminalization. Not because we want to turn it into a legal issue, because it's not. We don't want people arrested for simple possession or use.
Among the speakers, provincial party leaders Kevin Falcon and John Rustad, both of whom oppose decriminalization.
You have to understand there's going to be diversion that takes place. Because guess what? Language matters when it comes to drugs. When you say safe supply, to us that might mean one thing. To a 14-year-old, that means an entirely different thing.
The event was put on by Prosper, a nonprofit group co-founded by former Obama advisor Kevin Sabet.
We are not here to support any political party. We're nonpartisan, and we really don't appreciate anybody using this issue to gain political points. And so I think that has happened, and everybody's probably guilty of that.
The symposium was moved from downtown Vancouver to Richmond with just a few hours' notice. Organizers heard of a planned protest by activists. Fearing the event would be disrupted, they deregistered some of those who planned to attend and denied them entry to the hotel. Activists with groups like Vandu countered with a protest at the original venue.
We want to go there because we want to know, what do they propose? What are they planning? Can we work together? We're all trying to do the same thing, which is to support people who use drugs.
We understand emotions go high. Let's let things kind of simmer down a bit, and we've invited them to a very open, constructive, and peaceful dialogue when they're ready.
In Parliament, Dr. Bonnie Henry addressed just how polarized the issue has become.
Harm reduction and recovery and treatment are not in competition. It is not either or. They are both essential.
A view echoed by those with lived experience who say every resource is needed to stop the deaths.
Why can't we just support both? And, you want to support recovery and move forward with recovery, you don't have to say anything bad about harm reduction. And if harm reduction, you move forward, you don't have to say anything bad about recovery, because the truth is it's not helping the people who are struggling.
From Ottawa to the street to hotel conference rooms, a look at just how polarizing the policies around BC's drug crisis have become. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Richmond.
Still with health, hundreds of nurses from across BC took part in a lunch hour rally, calling on their employers to do more to keep them and other healthcare workers safe.
Safe staffing saves lives, and having enough nurses and taking care of those nurses will have a positive impact on all the residents of BC.
The rally comes after a survey from the BC Nurses Union revealed how often workplace safety incidents happen, including physical violence, verbal or emotional abuse, and exposure to illicit substances and weapons. The president of the Nurses Union says working conditions have to improve if they want to keep staff, let alone attract new workers. 3 BC communities hardest hit by brutal flooding in 2021 have been told they will not be getting federal funding to help rebuild. The mayor of Merritt says they applied for help to rebuild their dikes.
The atmospheric river, one of 13 happened, the one that caused us the most issues, happened on November 16th, 2021. And our dikes look exactly the same as they did that morning. There has not been one rock turned on those dikes.
He says he's not sure why their application was rejected, but says they need the money badly. Abbotsford and Princeton say their applications for federal help were also turned down.
It's a pretty big blow. We have no real funds now left to do any major dike works, any of the flood control works.
Those three mayors have now scheduled a news conference together for Monday. CBC News has asked the federal government why it rejected the community's request. We have not yet had a response. If you're planning to hit a Vancouver beach this summer with some beverages, you will now be officially allowed to take an alcoholic drink with you, but only to some locations. Starting Saturday until the end of September, people over 19 can legally bring and drink alcohol from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. at Trout Lake Beach, Jericho, Kitsilano, Locarno, New Brighton Beach, Second Beach, and Spanish Banks Beach. But you can't drink at English Bay Beach, Sunset Beach, Third Beach, Crab Park Beach, and beaches along the Fraser River. Police say they will be doing more seaside patrols this summer.
We're here to ensure that everyone visiting the city, those residents of the city that come to our parks and beaches, do so in a very safe and positive and happy manner.
And if you do plan to imbibe at a beach, you will have to leave glass bottles and containers at home. They're banned to try to keep broken glass and potential injuries down. BC's minimum wage is set to increase by 65 cents an hour on Saturday to $17.40. But a new report from the left-leaning Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives says 1 in 3 BC workers do not make a living wage, and advocates say many still won't even with this increase.
The amount you need to be able to get by is way higher than $17.40 an hour. At Living Wage for Families BC, we calculate what the living wage is, and in every community across BC, the living wage is significantly higher than $17.40. In Metro Vancouver, the living wage is $25.68 an hour, and that's an $8 an hour gap between the minimum wage and actually what you need to earn to be able to get by.
Of those earning less than $20 per hour, 59% are women, 52% are racialized, and 56% are aged 25 or older. The province is launching a new hotline for people who experience racism. The Office of the Attorney General says the Racist Incident Helpline is a toll-free number created for people who have been subjected to discrimination based on the color of their skin, culture, ethnicity, or place of origin. Callers will get support and guidance like counseling or help with reporting to police if they want to. Lower Mainland truckers say they are glad some cities are planning to build more parking spaces. But the demand far exceeds what's being offered, at least for now. As Saurabh Sandhu reports, many want the provincial government to get involved.
Dilraj Gill and his uncle Raman are taking stock of all the parking tickets their company trucks have been given in the last few months.
The city's been handing out a lot of tickets, but there's no there's not a good solution they really put up to that.
Gill says the shortage of legal parking spaces for commercial trucks is a perpetual and pricey problem.
Even if we do get a couple of spots, they're probably the prices are pretty high. It's around $700 to $800.
And trucking industry advocates say it's a widespread issue.
It's the whole Lower Mainland. So we have south of the Fraser, where all the trucking industry has been pushed out.
Other drivers say it's exhausting to try to find a spot.
I've been chained like 4 or 5 parking last 5-6 years. So there is no good parking available in Abbotsford and Langley, nowhere.
On Monday, the city of Surrey moved ahead with its plan to build 150 truck parking spots at 4 designated sites.
That 150 spots will absolutely be expanding. There will be more. But just this last council meeting on Monday, we passed 2 TUPs to add additional truck parking. So the private sector is getting involved and engaged.
Still, drivers say it's a drop in the bucket.
In Surrey alone, we need like over 2,000 parking spots. And the other thing, which we have to keep in mind is the proposals that have been put forward. They're like temporary use permits, TUPs as they call them. They're issued for 3-year term, and they can only be renewed once. So it's only for 6 years.
Kumar is calling on Victoria to get involved.
In our meeting with all the other municipalities, everybody points the fingers at the provincial government, and they are missing from the table.
The BC government notes in March it opened a new truck parking facility in North Surrey with more than 100 parking spots, and it expects to add 50 more as part of the Fraser Valley Highway 1 improvement project. More spaces for an issue that won't be solved overnight.
A temporary solution to a permanent need doesn't cut it.
Sohrab Sandhu, CBC News, Langley.
Darius Madavi joins us now with a first look at the weather, and it was a fairly decent day out there.
Yeah, at least here where we are, it was a beautiful day with blue skies. Most of the province got the same thing. A few showers and convective activity popping up in some parts of the interior, so maybe just a little bit of excitement for some people. For the most part, pretty calm. We do have a gale warning in place, a marine warning for some places along the central coast, up the north coast, and the North Island as well. But other than that, pretty calm. In terms of the next few days, though, we get a little bit of a break tomorrow for most people, unless you do find yourselves along that part of the coast. Other than that, pretty dry day tomorrow. Lots of sunshine before some cloud starts to move in on Saturday. Some rain then to follow as we get later into the day. And then on Sunday, that's when the real system arrives. It's going to be very wet, very windy, so be prepared for that on Sunday. And then probably continuing into early next week as well. In terms of conditions for tomorrow, though, we're going to see lots of sunshine across the board. Again, a few places where we get some rain up here, Port Hardy as well. Beyond that, though, very calm. If we take a look at our 5-day forecast for here in Vancouver, we're going to see lots of sunshine tomorrow. I've even shrunk this cloud manually so that we could really establish how much sun there's going to be. And then after that, no more sunshine. Lots of cloud, showery on Saturday, maybe a bit of dryness in the afternoon. But yeah, we are trending very wet on Sunday.
The graphics say it all. Thank you, Darius.
Thank you.
Still ahead, we're going to take a look at rental housing scams in BC and ask an expert how you can avoid getting caught in one. Stick around. If you've ever received a text message telling you that your tax refund is waiting, have you been tempted to click on it? The CRA wants you to know what is real and what is not. To try to help people detect a scam, they've set up scam escape rooms. We sent our Shivani Joshi down to one in Metrotown to see how it works.
Scam.
It's a scam?
Yeah,
Okay.
just hang up, right?
Let's hang up.
What's going on is that we are showing real-world examples of scams that can go on in your life. So this is going to give you an opportunity to see what it's like real life in the environment, like if you're getting scams.
You can read the hits before you swipe up, which will launch the timer.
Okay.
And the escape room experience will be started.
It's a lot about public awareness, and so, like I mentioned, text messages are quite common, phone calls are very common, emails are actually quite common as well.
Well, we didn't log into anything. Why would we be getting a one-time passcode? So I feel like that's kind of suspicious. Do we want to grab the phone? Hello?
There was reported over $500 million in income that was scammed out of people.
Okay, I can see why this is stressful. There's so many things happening.
And the scary thing is that the RCMP says less than 10% of all scams are actually reported. Hello, I'm here.
Welcome out. Did we pass?
So just make sure you educate yourself on what's real and what's not, and hopefully this event will help show people what it's like to see something real.
Your final score is 60%. Oh!
On to scams of another type now, rental scams. It is no secret that finding a place to live in our province is a challenge for many people, with soaring rents and just a lack of housing. Add to that mix having to navigate a whole host of scams as you're looking for somewhere to live, and the process can feel a bit daunting. Joining us now is Robert Patterson. He is a lawyer at the Tenant Resource and Advisory Centre. It's a nonprofit providing free legal advice on residential tenancy issues. Robert, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. What are the most common scams that you are being warned or told that people are running into?
For sure. I think you can kind of group scams into one of two camps. Maybe the most common, the most classically you think of are sort of bait and switch scams. Someone who puts a deposit down for a place, maybe without seeing it, shows up and realizes, the landlord doesn't actually own that, I don't have a unit to rent, or variations on that. Perhaps someone looks at a listing, signs an agreement, shows up, and the unit that they're getting is not what's in the picture. So they're ultimately not getting what they're paying for one way or another. I think those kind of scams typically target folks who are moving from out of province or out of community, who may not have friends or family in the community who can check those places out for them, and also, it really preys on people's desperation, right? And just needing to find a place who are willing to pay money without seeing the actual unit they're getting. So that's one of the reasons it's become more prevalent, I think.
Have you noticed an uptick in the number of people reporting that they're running into scams with you, possibly because of either inflation or cost of living or maybe even the pandemic?
I think there's certainly a rise in these kind of scams. I would also say there's also a rise in the other kind of scam that we kind of see, and that's the one we probably hear more about. That first issue is in many ways sort of like it can be hard to know the legal recourse to take against someone. If the scammer takes your money and runs, that's almost more of a criminal issue than it is a thing you can resolve yourself.
Right.
Whereas a lot of people, I think, are being put instead, maybe you sign a rental agreement and you get a place, but something about it is off. Something fishy is happening. And I think in that case, we see a lot of patterns where, for example, landlords will try and set up tenancies to make tenants believe that the laws and protections we have in BC don't apply to them. They'll say, oh, this isn't really a tenancy, this is a sublet. I'm subletting it through my family member or corporation.
Right.
Something that actually doesn't really bear legal water, but it gives the impression that perhaps you're in a more tenuous place. And because you're in a more tenuous place, tenants are more worried about asserting their rights. They're worried about saying no to illegal rent increases. That sort of creates this whole other category where people who are sort of precariously housed it's almost like an ongoing scam. People not realizing that they have these protections, and instead it's being eroded. It's eroding affordability, it's eroding their security in their homes. And so that's, I think, also a huge problem.
So what's your major advice to people if they come to you or they're watching now and thinking, that's happening to me? What can they do?
Yeah, so for that second category, I think really important first to understand your rights as a tenant. Go to our website, tenants.bc.ca, call the residential tenancy branch, get some information, basic information on how, what rights you have. And then if you want to take steps to assert those rights, there are advocates at places like TRAC and also across the province that can provide some advice or even representation, in asserting that level of defense. I would say too, for tenants in that first camp who may have found a place or aren't sure when they're setting out to try to find a place. Really important, as always, to do your due diligence. Try and get to the unit yourself. Do a land title search on the property to see if you can get the name of the owner, so at least you can get a feel for who you're dealing with. If someone's clearly not the owner, maybe that can set up a bit of a red flag, and you can be a bit more cautious. But yeah, I think one of the challenges in BC in general with our tenancy law is so much of the time tenants have to be their own champions. There are services like us. We want to be as big as we can. But so often I think there's such a bigger place for regulation and regulation of landlords essentially to get people more comfortable with the marketplace, knowing that they can go into it, look for a place and get something at the end of the day that's fair and legal.
Robert Patterson, we appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
There are new breast cancer screening recommendations for women under the age of 50. The suggestions and who it applies to, next. There are now updated guidelines for breast screening in Canada. A national task force is not recommending mammograms for women under 50 who are of average risk. That difference differs from the recent advice from the Canadian Cancer Society that testing ought to begin at 40. As Tashana Reid reports, it sparked a fierce debate in the medical community and beyond.
Strong words from Canada's health minister about new draft recommendations for breast cancer screening.
I'm concerned and I'm disappointed.
Adding, he's asking for an additional review by the chief medical health officers from across the country.
The guidelines that have been released by the task force simply stated don't conform with the conversations that I've had with experts across the country.
The Canadian Task Force on Preventative Healthcare says after a thorough review of research and data, they don't see the benefit in lowering breast cancer screening to women under 50.
We recommended against systematic screening because the harms are big and the benefits are small.
Some of those harms, they say, are unnecessary tests or biopsies and anxiety for individuals who may not have cancer in the end, but added that for patients who do want a mammogram, they should be allowed.
So if they choose to be screened, they should not be denied access. That should be provided to them by the provincial screening programs.
Currently, it's a patchwork system across the country. Some provinces and territories have moved to offer screening earlier. In Yukon, British Columbia, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, and Newfoundland, women have access at 40, and Ontario will start this fall, while Alberta and Northwest Territories start screening at 45. The rest of the country has stayed at 50.
It makes me angry for all Canadians. Where we live in this country shouldn't dictate our access to the standard of care of medicine.
2 years ago, Fernanda Dominguez Perticaris pushed for a mammogram at age 49, despite her doctor saying it wasn't necessary. 1 month later, she was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. She had surgery and multiple rounds of chemo and radiation.
If this had been caught even earlier, had I had a mammogram a year earlier or 2 years earlier, who's to say that I would have needed chemo at that point?
The draft guidelines will now be up for public consultation for 60 days and possibly longer if needed. Tashana Reid, CBC News, Toronto.
CBC News has learned Alberta is falling short of its minimum standards in its daycare health inspections. Critics say the province has failed to learn from last year's E. coli outbreak that hospitalized dozens of children in Calgary. And as Terry Reith explains, the lack of action is putting the health of many kids at risk.
The report, prepared after last year's E. coli outbreak, found that health inspectors failed to make even one annual visit to more than 20% of Alberta's licensed daycares. The internal AHS documents show inspectors are bogged down, having to return to some daycares 2 or 3 times simply to correct problems. We shared those results with Keith Warner. He's a food safety expert at the University of Guelph.
So this tells me that a lot of resources are dedicated to try and cleaning up messes which should have occurred and letting sort of facilities get away with things before actually making the ultimate decision whether to close them down or let them go.
Sarah McDonald's 4-year-old son was hospitalized for 3 days, and it took 3 weeks to recover from E. coli. She is still trying to find out how and why that outbreak happened.
I don't have faith in the system anymore, that they are okay, and I think it's really become apparent to me that parents need to do all the due diligence in asking the right questions and following up again and again with the child care companies.
In a written statement, Alberta Health Services did say that it was still dealing with a backlog of inspections as a result of the pandemic when the report was compiled in March. The head of the Health Inspectors Union isn't buying that, though. Mike Parker says there aren't enough inspectors to do the job right.
When you look at these circumstances where children are being fed in these facilities, when you look at an environment where our kids are being taken care of by people, it requires inspections. It requires a maintenance program that ensures that our kids are safe.
All of this happening at a time when the federal government is pouring billions into building available and affordable child care. Alberta has added 35,000 new spaces since 2021 and plans on adding another 68,000 in the next 2 years. Terry Reith, CBC News, Edmonton.
A hacking group claims it has stolen the personal information of hundreds of millions of Ticketmaster users around the world. The group is said to be demanding a ransom in return for not selling that data. As Scott Peterson reports, the info reportedly includes addresses, phone numbers, and partial credit card details of more than 500 million customers.
This is potentially the personal financial data of 560 million people around the world being affected by this hack with Ticketmaster, and a lot of people storing their personal information there with their credit card information, all potentially vulnerable to hackers and thieves out there. Now, this first came reported from Australian authorities, and they say they're working directly with Ticketmaster and with U.S. authorities as far as trying to get to the bottom of this problem and what exactly happened here. But these are the details that we do know. A hacker group called Shiny Hunters, they're reportedly demanding $700,000 Canadian in ransom. This is a high-profile hacking group. They're known for going against big corporations like Microsoft and AT&T, and people should be warned that if you've dealt with Ticketmaster, your name, address, phone number, partial payment information, including the last 4 digits of your credit card, the expiration date, all sensitive information potentially in the hands of hackers. The U.S. Embassy spokesperson also involved here, saying the FBI is offering assistance and they're engaging with Ticketmaster to, quote, understand the incident. And this is not the first time Ticketmaster has been hacked by thieves. This happened with Taylor Swift and her Eras tour as well, having a cyber attack having delayed ticket sales there. And Australia, again, was the first to report this situation, but this is a worldwide phenomena. I've got calls out as well to Ticketmaster in Canada to find out how many Canadian customers are also affected. Scott Peterson, CBC News, Toronto.
14 pro-democracy activists have been found guilty of subversion in Hong Kong, while some human rights groups are refuting those convictions. That's next. Back to our top story now. For his critics, Donald Trump has been untouchable, always defying accountability. For his supporters, Trump has been unsinkable, always defying persecution. But with his criminal conviction today, many of those assumptions have been swept aside. Alison Northcott has reaction from voters across the U.S.
Trump is guilty!
As soon as the guilty verdict came down, reaction outside the courthouse was fervent and divided.
Guilty on all counts.
Just to see that, a president can be found guilty, a president can be held accountable, I think is an incredible show of democracy.
No, he's innocent. He's an innocent man. The media is not telling the truth, no.
It's a very sad day for America, that's all I'm going to say.
Why do you feel that way?
Because this is political persecution and there's absolutely nothing behind this case.
And for many, Trump's conviction won't sway their conviction or their vote.
I'm not even worried about it. Even if Trump goes to jail, gets out, or gets bail, or whatever, we're all going to vote for Trump still. It's not going to. How's it going to change my mind that he just got in trouble here? Big deal. Big deal.
They're using this judicial system just to penalize him to get him away from running for president again.
Go to jail.
But his detractors say the guilty verdict was a long time coming.
Oh my God. This is wonderful. It's good. It's so good, you guys.
Well, I certainly hope it'll hurt his chances, but I've been wrong about him for 12 years. So why anybody would vote for a felon for the United States president, I cannot imagine.
Yes, please kick it off. All the way, lock him up. Jack in New York. Trump is guilty.
Trump's motorcade pulled away from the courthouse, the moment a break with U.S. political history. But whether this verdict changes votes at the ballot box won't be known until November. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Washington.
A suspected AI-generated image of the southern Gaza city of Rafah is sweeping across social media. It shows rows and rows of tents in a large camp with the words, "All eyes on Rafah." It's been shared more than 47 million times, including by celebrities as well as others all over the world. But as Georgie Smythe found out, experts say it might not be as impactful as you think.
These are real images of refugee camps in Gaza, showing the chaos of tents and the reality of displaced people who live there. But going viral online is this image, set against a backdrop of endless lined tents and a dramatic snow-capped mountain range, with the message, "All eyes on Rafah." It's been shared more than 47 million times, but many suspect it was created through AI.
It's most likely an imaginary scene.
It appeared on an Instagram account after an Israeli airstrike at a camp earlier this week and presents a more sanitized view of what's happening in Gaza's southernmost city, which may have allowed for the image to circulate more readily on social media than actual images of the war.
It's unclear if it was AI generated or not. We think it is. It looks like it would have been text-to-image generation, but it could be a very good illustrator using regular computer graphics and special effects.
The image also provoked the creation of this AI-generated image from an Israeli supporter online. Some are calling the All Eyes on Rafah image the latest iteration of slacktivism or lazy activism, when people support a cause online without making much commitment to it, like people posting black squares online for the Black Lives Matter campaign in 2020. Actions that can be genuine but often lack real-life impacts, say researchers.
Sometimes what happens is that there's this kind of peak of support and awareness, and then it fades from public consciousness.
Palestinians who want more awareness about the war say the AI-made image glosses over the realities of the conflict.
There's this feeling like, Palestinians are going viral, but they're also somehow invisible at the same time.
The question is, what happens now? The image and its message may have been shared millions of times, but its impact in the real world is harder to measure. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Some members of Parliament testified before the House of Commons Procedure and House Affairs Committee today. It's part of a review of Parliament's workplace harassment and violence prevention policy. As Rafi Boudjikanian reports, the committee heard detailed accounts of politicians being subjected to abuse.
It's just not the venue that I want to be in anymore.
When Pam Dumoff announced she was not running for office again earlier this month, citing harassment, she says some of the responses she got proved her point.
For example, and again I'm quoting, "Resign now, you stupid effing cow. Don't wait. Run and hide, libtard effing bitch. Good riddance, C-word."
She was not the only one who testified before this committee looking into harassment of MPs and staff on Parliament Hill.
Somebody once said to me, "I want to f you gently with a chainsaw." Imagine the violence, the thought of it even.
In fact, in the last 5 years, the people in charge of protecting MPs say incidents of harassment from the public have increased 800%. Not just online abuse. A man was charged with arson for setting fire to a Mississauga, Ontario Liberal MP's office 2 years ago.
Christia!
And then there was this incident of a man following the finance minister and her staff at an appearance in Grande Prairie, Alberta.
What the f are you doing in Alberta?
To give you an example on threat behaviors towards towards the MPs, in 2019 there was approximately 8 files we opened up, and in 2023 there was 530.
The Liberal MPs both said they've noticed upticks in the hate they are subjected to whenever some Conservatives take to social media to accuse them of corruption, something Conservatives at committee pushed back on.
I have been on the receiving end of what you have described, but what your members have done. So what we can't get into when we're talking about solutions is pretending that one party is above scrutiny. You wouldn't suggest that the Prime Minister is directly responsible for the harassment I've received, would you?
I've been trying to stay above the fray because I'm not getting into whether the opposition leader or the Prime Minister. I mean, if you want to go there, we can.
The Liberals are suggesting an online code of conduct for MPs. The Conservatives, amendments to the criminal code to restrict bail for serial harassers. Neither side is fully sold on the other's proposal. Though while parties acknowledge the problem, they don't seem to be seeing eye to eye on a solution, at least not yet. Rafi Wujikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
A court in Hong Kong has found 14 pro-democracy activists guilty of subversion. Among those convicted are former lawmakers and citizens who joined the mass demonstrations 5 years ago. As Laura Westbrook tells us, some human rights groups have denounced the verdicts as politically motivated.
This landmark national security trial involves 47 of the city's most prominent pro-democracy figures. 31, including famous faces like Joshua Wong, had pled guilty to the charge of conspiracy to commit subversion, a very serious charge under the Beijing-imposed national security law, which is punishable by up to life in prison. Of the 16 that had maintained their innocence, the 3 High Court judges acquitted only 2, and the prosecution has said it intends to appeal those 2 acquittals. Now, crowds gathered here since early this morning to witness the verdict in this landmark security trial. Now, it centers around this unofficial primary that took place in July of 2020 with the aim of picking candidates for an election that year. The prosecution argued that the aim of gaining a majority in the legislature to block government votes and force then leader Carrie Lam to resign was a plot to overthrow the government. And in the ruling today, the court said that that scheme would have created political instability and a constitutional crisis. Experts have said this trial was a test of the city's rule of law, and human rights groups have criticized the verdict. Beijing imposed the national security law in the wake of the city's massive anti-government protests in 2019. Its supporters, Beijing, and the Hong Kong government has said that it was necessary to restore order and stability in Hong Kong. Laura Westbrook for CBC News, Hong Kong.
The fertility rate has plummeted in South Korea. Now government officials there have found a unique way to address that challenge. As Philippe Leblanc reports, they're encouraging people to work well into their golden years and helping them do it.
At 61 years old, with a career in finance, Chang Eung-won could retire. Instead, he's becoming a building safety inspector.
아무래도 제가 이제 그 직장 생활하면서
He had financial concerns and wanted to be able to support his children's education. The South Korean government was more than happy to help. Centers like this one train older workers like Chung to transition into new careers.
중에 60%가 지금 중장년이에요.
60% of Koreans are over 40, says the director of the center. South Korea is seeing a surge of interest in preparing for a second career after retirement. The country demographics present a huge economic challenge. By next year, 20% of its 50 million people will be older than 65, what's known as a super-aged society. It's such a concern that some unions are on board with pushing back the current retirement age of 60.
They find another job in other companies.
This aging expert believes that integrating older workers is crucial for Korea's productivity and public services. South Korea also has the lowest fertility rate in the world. Government investments worth nearly 300 billion Canadian dollars since 2006 have failed to slow that trend down as fears for the future grow. Lee Hai-won is 4 months pregnant. She left her job to have a child and start her own business. She says she's seen too many women sidelined in the company where she worked for 13 years after starting a family.
제가 다니던 회사는 특히 남성 직원 비율이 굉장히 높은.
She believes that many Koreans also hesitate to get married and have children because social pressures and expectations are overwhelming. Many do not feel financially stable even in their 30s.
여기.
Chung Eung-won says he plans on doing his part for many more years.
제가 70이건 80이건 일을 계속 할 수가 있습니다.
He's even studying to move up in his new company and to keep working until he's 80. Exactly what the South Korean government is hoping to hear from him and many others. Philippe Leblanc, CBC News, Seoul.
Darius Madavi joins us now with the BC-wide weather forecast, and at least for the South Coast, as you mentioned, lovely day.
Yes, exactly. And many people experienced a lovely day. Some showers at times in parts of the interior, but overall, beautiful. Temperature still a little bit below seasonal in many places, and that's going to continue over the next few days, the next probably week or so. Temperatures remaining below seasonal, maybe coming up a little bit tomorrow in some places, but overall, pretty stubbornly below where we should be for this time of year. But in most places, only by a few degrees, no more than 5 degrees or so. So it's nothing extraordinary, but it would be nice to get some slightly warmer temperatures, especially for anybody doing anything outside. Now, if we take a look at the precipitation, this is where the excitement comes this week since the temperatures are pretty boring. We're going to see that rain arriving on the coast overnight tonight for the north and central coasts in particular, as well as the North Island. That is going to happen, that is going to come down to the North Island tomorrow morning, and then it's going to continue down by the afternoon to the other rest of the northern half of the island before continuing down probably overnight Friday into Saturday. That's when we're going to get it here in the Lower Mainland and in the Greater Victoria area as well. So still some rain coming on Saturday, but quickly drying up. Actually, Saturday is not looking too bad anymore. By sort of around noon-ish and then into the afternoon, nothing but a scattered shower for the Lower Mainland and most of the island as well. So then that rain is moving into the interior. Sunday, though, is when things change once again. We're going to see that next system roll in, bringing plenty of precipitation pretty much across the province, at least the southern half of the province. There will be drier times for the interior, but for the coast, it's pretty consistent rainfall. If anything, it might feel a little bit like an atmospheric river. It doesn't quite qualify, but that's what it's going to feel like on Sunday, given the gray conditions and all the rain that will be coming down. So be ready for that. But after that, just some more rainy days as we get into Monday, Tuesday, and probably Wednesday as well, before maybe drying up as we get later into the week. Winds will also bring a little bit of excitement, but not too much, peaking at sometimes in the northeast, but we don't have the other conditions, the temperature and the dryness, that would really make us concerned about fire conditions. So overall, not too much to worry about there. But on the coast, especially as we see that system roll in on Sunday, we will have some very high winds at times, so be prepared for that. If we take a look at our conditions tonight, again, fairly calm, some rain in a few places, but mostly just some cloud that will be clearing up into tomorrow for most of us. And if we zoom into here in Vancouver, we'll just take a quick look at what our rain is going to look like over the next few days. Again, some of that arrives dry on Friday, some of that arrives overnight Friday into Saturday, then drying up for most of Saturday before the real stuff arrives on Sunday.
Okay, we'll wait for it. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
So you remember, Jimmy quit, Jody got married. But guess what? The band is back. We're going to trace the summer of '69 all the way to Vanderhoof. Stick around.
So just to remind you, and despite peer pressure, I'm not going to sing it. Jimmy quit, Jody got married, and the best days of the summer of '69 in Vanderhoof faded away.
But the Bryan Adams hit lived on, and it turns out so did the band. We were in the town of Vanderhoof recently for a reunion of sorts. Check this out.
I was in Vanderhoof, and it was magical. It's when I discovered music. It's when I got my first drum kit, got my first guitar, met some guys and made a band. Then I met Bryan Adams. He and I started writing, 1978, and 5 years of really nothing to show for it. We just worked really hard, and really there was no hits until about 5 years in. And it always started the same, two guys in a room staring at an empty piece of paper. Like, what are we gonna write about? And on that particular day, we decided we would write about our first bands, our first guitars, our first girlfriends, just kind of our youth. And, you know, got my first real 6-string, okay, yeah, bought it at the 5 and dime. But it wasn't called Summer of '69. It was called Best Days of My Life. And tucked away in the first verse was this little phrase, Summer of '69. And suddenly the song just like came alive.
We're going to put Jim back on the drums, and we're doing Summer of '69 with the original words that Jim wrote with the Vanderhoof band members.
Yeah, so when Bryan and I were sitting in the room and we got to that line, I said, my guys in the band, Chuck quit and Gordy got married. And Bryan went, no. And guys in his band, Jimmy, his previous drummer, and Jody, his sound man. So Brian said, what about Jimmy quit and Jody got married? I said, yeah, I agree, that sounds better. My memories, as Brian and I were sitting there putting the lyric together, I was channeling my days in Vanderhoof. When I hear the song, I just think about Vanderhoof.
Oh, I loved the summer of '69.
Yeah, ask anybody who was there.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast anytime on our app, CBC Gem, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And Tanya Fletcher will have your next local news set for 11 o'clock right after the Nationals. So please join her then. Good night.
Good night.